You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the second Doctor story, The Wheel in Space. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to get your very own Secrets of Doctor Who t-shirt or phone case or mug or more by visiting our merch site at sqpn.com/merch. You want to stick around to the end of the episode? We have some more of your fantastic listener feedback. And I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network, sure to enjoy, featuring the three of us, called The Secrets of Star Trek. And you can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Star Trek. So this time we're talking about The Wheel in Space. So Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens in this episode?
This time, the second Doctor and Jamie land inside a rocket with no crew in the late 21st century. Nobody knows it at the time, but the robots on the rocket have been programmed to help the Cybermen take over a space station. Once they get to the space station, the Doctor and Jamie meet Zoe Harriet, a young 21st century scientist who will be the new companion. Soon, the Cybermen's plan for the station begins to unfold. They initially use cybermats to conduct sabotage of the station's meteorite defense laser. They also cause a star to go nova, sending a deadly shower of meteorites towards the station, knowing that this would prompt the humans to search the rocket for the elements needed to repair the laser. This allows them to hypnotize humans and get the Cybermen aboard the station, which they plan on using to project a signal beam for cyber ships to home in on and invade Earth. After they cause tremendous damage on the station, the Doctor leads the humans in defeating the Cybermen. The cyber ship is destroyed with the station's laser, and the remaining Cybermen are thrown off into space. Afterwards, Zoe sneaks aboard the TARDIS and demands to be taken with the Doctor and Jamie on their adventures. The end. Dom, you're muted.
Sorry, I was thrown off by something technical here. So what happened with this story is it's one of those mostly missing episodes where we've only got 2 of the 6 that are available in full video. In BritBox, where I watched it, has the other ones are all telesnap versions where we have still photos over the audio.
With some linking narration on the screen.
Which is very helpful.
What's happening visually. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they did a really good job. And it seemed to me that there were telesnaps, quote unquote, that were actually more like photoshopped scenes, where you could tell not just like the doors opening and closing and things like that, but, where they took, characters and put them in different positions to show what was going on screen. So I think they did a really good job of keeping the telesnaps moving, because sometimes these telesnaps, they're not as many pictures available that, so that it doesn't move as quickly. But this seemed like they did a good job of keeping kind of the snaps moving so that it wasn't static for very long.
Yeah, they did do some editing of the telesnaps in order to convey a better visual sense of what was happening. Although they also reused, I noticed, a lot of telesnaps. Like there's a shot of Zoe's face that gets used regularly when she's talking.
Yep. Right. Speaking of Zoe, it's my understanding, I guess, she's the last of the second Doctor to companions to arrive. At the end of his term, it will be Jamie and Zoe with the Doctor.
Correct. Yeah, they're both there through the War Games.
Okay.
This is also the 4th appearance of the Cybermen on the show. The Daleks had been the breakout characters, and for a while in early Who, there was an attempt, because Terry Nation had the rights to the Daleks. He was their creator, and he had other ambitions for them. He actually tried to develop an American television show just based on the Daleks. No Doctor Who. This is the Dalek show. Huh. And while he was working on that, he was hesitant to do too much with the Daleks on Doctor Who. And so there was this search to find, well, who can we have in place of the Daleks? And they tried out various possibilities. Most of them were one-shots that didn't appear again. Most of them were in the second Doctor's time. But the Cybermen ended up being the sort of secondary Dalek characters. They had appeared at the very end of the first Doctor's time in the 10th planet. That was their first appearance. But then they appeared 4 times during the era of the second Doctor, and this is the third of those. We've already talked about the moon base with Jamie and Polly and Ben. Then we did Tomb of the Cybermen with Jamie and Victoria, and now we're up to the Wheel in Space with Jamie and Zoe. And Jamie and Zoe will be back for the 4th and final appearance of the Cybermen, The Invasion, which also introduces not only a lot of iconic Cybermen imagery, like marching in front of St. Paul's, but also it introduces Unit and the Brigadier.
Is cyber conversion a thing that only started with New Who? Did that start earlier?
No. It's implicit in the 10th planet. And it also is there in Tomb of the Cybermen, where they're like, you will become like us, that kind of stuff.
Because that wasn't an aspect of this story. They weren't converting. They were hypnotizing, taking control of people, but they weren't converting people. And so you kind of don't have the same body horror idea of being turned into a Cyberman.
Yeah. It wasn't until New Who that you actually see a conversion.
Right.
Because, of course, then they, New Who, they get the blades and everything, the lasers and everything cutting.
The very graphic stuff. Yeah.
They also, you'll notice, don't have a vulnerability to gold in this episode. That's something from the 4th Doctor's time.
Right.
Just quick set plastic.
Yes. Which that's like that spray foam you can use for insulation. I thought that was funny. But so we start by leaving behind Victoria. So we kind of are picking up from where we left last time, where they left Victoria in the late 1960s in Fury from the Deep. And Jamie's not happy about it. Neither is the Doctor. And again, we talk about this all the time with the second Doctor, but he's still at this stage less the I'm confident, I know more than you, I am, the Time Lord about town sort of guy in charge. I mean, he's still in charge, but there's much more of an equal footing with him and Jamie, especially on an emotional basis.
Yeah, this Doctor is Columbo. He's humble, and and that's partly an act. He's doing that in order to get people to underestimate him, but it's also just part of who he is. I mean, he doesn't have to get his companions to underestimate him. He's just a humbler guy. This is part of what they were trying to do with Jodie Whittaker, only here it works, and with Jodie Whittaker, it fails.
Right. I mean, you kind of get this with the 7th Doctor and a little bit with the 5th Doctor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So the TARDIS is damaged as it lands, and something was trying to tempt them out of the TARDIS. We have, the Doctor talks about that. Yeah. But we don't develop that idea.
Well, it's so ever since the very first episode, An Unearthly Child, there have been hints that the TARDIS is alive. And we saw in the first Doctor's time, the TARDIS could show, like in the second story, in The Edge of Destruction, the TARDIS shows them images. It doesn't have a holographic interface at this point, so it shows them images to try to communicate with them. And it does that again at the beginning of this episode, where when they land on the rocket, the TARDIS senses danger, and so it shows them on the scanner pictures of more pleasant places that they could be, and the Doctor reasons it's trying to tempt us to go to these other places so we won't encounter the danger here.
Right. Oh, okay. I thought it was the idea was tempt them out to leave the TARDIS, but it was more tempt them to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then the TARDIS is damaged and starts releasing mercury vapor into the control room, and
the fluid link is gone again.
That darn fluid link. And he grabs the time vector generator, which is basically this little rod, before running out, and that means that the TARDIS is no longer larger on the inside. It's now a normal police box.
How about that?
Why? I didn't understand why he was doing that. Did you catch that?
Well, it's for some obscure technobabble reason. The behind the scenes reason is just to motivate Jamie and the Doctor to get out of the TARDIS.
Okay. and the rod is going to be important as a sort of MacGuffin throughout the episode, throughout the story. So they need him to take it with him for whatever reason. But it means that the TARDIS isn't going to go anywhere. Nobody's going to be able to hijack it or whatever, which no one ever really does, really. But so they're on a rocket ship. I'm doing the air quotes for those watching the video, a rocket ship, because at this era, this is what spaceships were. They were rocket ships. And a lot of the space related stuff is, well, it's not all that realistic. Like, sun's going supernova here and there. And
do not cause meteorites to fall towards your station.
No. And if a sun goes supernova close enough to cause meteorites to approach your station within a few hours, meteorites are not your big problem.
But they don't deal with, I mean, the real threat from a sun going nova is radiation, and will it end Earth? And there have been apparently points in history where radiation from novas did cause mass extinctions on Earth. We have some evidence that's the case. Fortunately, good news, none of the stars nearby appear to be ready to go nova, and the ones that do appear to be ready to go nova are far enough away from us that it wouldn't cause us too much of a problem here on Earth. But in this episode, they ignore the distance, and because this sun actually would have gone off years and years ago. And maybe thousands of years ago, and the Cybermen did it. They indicate the Cybermen did it.
Yeah,
so they're ignoring the distance, and they're also somehow this is causing a meteor storm in
our solar system.
Yeah. By the way, I do want to, despite the unrealism, I want to comment on the Cybermen in this episode, because they have a new design, a slightly new design. They're no longer the best version of the Cybermen, which to my mind is the Mondasian version, where they have body stockings over their bodies.
Right.
Here they do have the armor and so forth. It's not as bad as in New Who, where the armor they look like robots. They do look like robots here, but they're not as intimidating as robots, which I think is good. But they do come across as very cold and slow moving and analytical and creepy. And that's accentuated by the lack of a soundtrack frequently when the Cybermen are doing things. I noticed that there's often not music playing when the Cybermen are up to no good. You're just watching the Cybermen do stuff, and there are no sound effects, there's no music, and that silence makes them creepier.
One of the things that has always been an issue for me in this period with the Cybermen is the temptation to modulate the voice through a synthesizer. Now, the Cybermen themselves were fine. The Cyber Controller had this real strong synthesizer, hard to understand, even to the point where the voice actor had to over enunciate like Elza, just really overdo it in order to even be basically understood. And that's one of the things. I mean, there was common in this era for this is how they did voice, changing and that sort of thing. But it's really hard to understand at points, the Cyber Controller. I had to follow along in the transcript that's available online in order to catch some of the dialogue, frankly. But
BBC sound has never been great. I mean, I watch BBC shows with subtitles turned on for that reason.
Even modern ones.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how much you turn up the sound is still muddy.
And of course, this is them using what was then latest technology, that voice modulation that does the pitch bending and everything was all really new technology, and synthesizers, really not even they weren't even really synthesizers as we understand them, like the Moog synthesizers and things like that.
Right.
Were very, very new technology. So of course they got their hands on them and had to play with them. And of course that goes even into the 80s. I was just thinking of, you're talking about background music, Earthshock, the Adric dies because of the Cybermen episode, and the background music, boom, 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 but it's a synthesized,
right.
And it just comes off bad. So I agree with you though. This there really isn't a lot of background music in this.
Yeah.
One thing, since you mentioned, so it's never named on screen. You could call it the Cyber Controller. In the background literature, they call it the Cyber Planner.
Yeah.
And it appears to be an AI. It looks like a machine. It doesn't have a human form. They talk to it over a screen. And so they're being remotely directed by this cyber planner thing. We have sort of had cyber controllers before, meaning a Cyberman on the scene who's in charge.
Right.
We had that, for example, in the Tomb of the Cybermen. There was like one Cyberman who was in charge, and he had a big kind of brain that was sort of visible through a casing. But here they're talking to this AI, and it's the first appearance of this kind of thing. And it sort of foreshadows something from the latest appearances of the Cyberman in the 13th Doctor's time, where they have this AI called the Cyberium that is controlling the Cybermen collective. And it's depicted visually differently. It looks like a kind of shifting cloud of mercury that changes shape in the 13th Doctor's time. But this is basically like the Cyberium that they're talking to. It's visually different, but it appears to just be an AI that's giving them orders.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There's another robot on the rocket ship, by the way, that's called a servo robot in the script and that sort of thing. And I thought it was going to be an important piece, but it's really just seems to be like a maintenance droid on the rocket ship. I don't like it. It was
R2D2.
And it was like sealing off parts of the ship for unknown reasons. It was just kind of an odd thing, sort of, I don't know, plot advancing device. It was kind of weird.
It basically acted kind of like a defender of the ship and, remote control or autopilot type of system type of deal. Yeah, it was just basically the opponent that the Doctor and Jamie have to face until they got to the wheel and had to start facing the Cybermen.
Right.
And it turns out it was reprogrammed by the Cybermen. They tell us.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. When they finally get to the station, it's interesting. They never call it a space station. I don't know. I guess the nomenclature of space stations hadn't filtered fully down into popular consciousness to where that was the natural thing to call them. They always refer to it as a wheel.
Right.
And they even, instead of referring to it as a station, they refer to it in dialogue as a space wheel. We're on a space wheel.
Yeah, and this is around the same time as 2001: A Space Odyssey, isn't it? This is in 1968.
Yeah.
In 2001, which I think that was the expectation, is in the future space stations would be these rotating wheels in space. I think this was the contemporary idea.
Which is, they probably will be in the future because it makes it easier to generate rotational gravity.
Yes. And other elements of the sort of future, what do they call it? Paleofuturism, like the past looking at the future, is the food. There's at one point the Jamie and Doctor, Jamie's hungry and he wants a nice roast beef dinner. And so the Doctor goes on board the rocket ship and gets a bunch of like pills and cubes and things, which was very much what Star Trek did at the time. And people of this era had this idea that in the future, food as we know it would be obsolete and all food would come in pill form, or it'd be much more efficient. That's
because vitamins were a big thing at the time. The people thought, oh, this is the first stage of that. We're taking our vitamins.
Yeah. The idea that we would do away with eating regular food. I think that was, even in the 20s and 30s, people were starting to think about this idea of we wouldn't make regular food. And that's when we had convenience foods, bird's eye frozen foods and TV dinners and that sort of stuff. So I kind of love looking at this era and how it looked at the future. It's one of the reasons I like watching this classic stuff.
It's often interesting to see what visions of the future in science fiction get wrong, because we're biologically programmed to want to eat food, not pills. We can take pills, but there are pleasures, as the Fifth Doctor points out, to eating a well-prepared meal. And that's built into us on a biological level, as well as every other animal on Earth. We're all programmed to enjoy eating. And so if you watch these old movies and TV shows, like, say, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, when people from our time encounter space food and it's pills, they all go, ooh. And I'm going, yes, you're right. That's exactly the reaction people will have. That's why that will never take off.
Right.
Because we won't enjoy it. So that they get wrong. It's kind of like, I noticed reading a lot of fin de siècle science fiction, stuff from around the turn of the 20th century. they all envision the future as or a lot of them envision the future as having suicide booths that you can just walk up to and commit suicide on the street. And it's like, that's not actually going to happen.
I hope not. So, yeah.
It is interesting, though, now that we're getting to the point where we're actually having artificially made meats, like they're talking about how they can basically grow chicken breast.
Yeah.
Artificially. Lab grown. And so there's some of these things in the future, they're not getting so far off. The cubes are a possibility. You could have artificially grown chicken breast cubes, I guess.
Yum.
So we'll continue to have artificial replacement foods like artificial meat, lab meat. But
no, you won't eat a pill that tastes like roast beef.
Right. We're going to have the tactile experience of eating the meat.
Actually, I want the Willy Wonka meal and a stick of gum.
The everlasting gobstopper or something. Yeah.
No, it was
several.
Yeah, it was a gum, like a piece of gum where it tastes like a full meal. So that's what I want.
So we have this wheel in space. It's a space station. They call the ship that the Doctor and Jamie are on the Silver Carrier, and it's like well off course. It's 9 weeks overdue from where it was supposed to be, and it turns out it's not. Like they assume it went adrift, but Zoe later on will, make the case that it's impossible for it to have drifted, that it had to have been under control and brought to this location.
And refueled.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
It also, even though they constantly call it a rocket, and it does have a rocket motor, it doesn't look like what you'd think of as a rocket.
Yeah.
We think of Saturn V rockets and things like that, and they're all big, tall, cylindrical things. And this is not. This looks more like a space shuttle. Yeah. It has wings, and it's clearly it's designed for atmospheric flight.
Right. And the servo robot, as this ship approaches the station, releases a bunch of glowy balls out to this airlock that approach the station and end up passing through the skin of it. And I kind of like the idea that the people in the space station aren't all knowing. They kind of have like something's going on, something strange, but they don't have like Star Trek sensors where we know every single thing happening in space around us that we've detected.
Yeah. They're detecting little things like magnetic anomalies as these little spheres go through, and shifts in like vibrations and sudden momentary slight loss of air pressure that then is corrected by the system. And so those are the little spheres puncturing the hull of the space station. And the reason they're being sent is they contain cybermats. So that's how they're getting the cybermats on board the station.
Yes. And meanwhile, on the station, I like this crew of this space station. It's interesting. It's an international crew. We have British, we have I think Spanish, Russian, French, Irish. Flanagan, who was fun. I like Flanagan. So we have a whole international crew, and the commander. It's very interesting. And throughout the second Doctor's time, we keep having these leaders that he encounters who are tyrannical, authoritarian, or they're just obstinate and arrogant. And it's an interesting theme throughout the second Doctor, and it happens in other Doctors too. But I noticed it especially with the second Doctor, this continuing theme of, we just had Fury from the Deep, where we had the same sort of thing, the leader who kind of goes insane, but is arrogant in the midst of it.
If you have a base under siege, you want it to have a crazy, ineffective leader. So there could be problems for the Doctor to solve and someone for him to butt heads with.
Right.
In this case, the guy's name is Jarvis Bennett. And he's not an evil guy. He's very officious. He's very do what I say and by the book. He's resistant to thinking outside of the book, which is required by this kind of situation, because Cybermen attacking you is not in the book.
Right.
And so there are scenes where he's just ridiculously stubborn. And he does end up going crazy. At first, it had been a long time since I had seen this. I watched it in the past, but I haven't watched it recently. And I was like, is he under cyber control? Is that why he's starting to act crazy? Because they make a point of showing you he was stubborn early, but then he just starts going crazy, and they emphasize it by his actions. They don't just tell you he's crazy, they show you he's crazy, because he's walking around and he's suddenly acting happy and talking to himself, but in a way that it's ambiguous. Is he talking to people, to the crew around him, or is he talking to fantasy people? It's like, who exactly is he talking to here? And he has, an illogical train of thought as he's doing that. And then they start having other people like Gemma, the lady scientist who's the station's doctor and psychiatrist. She notices he's out of it, and other people, they start to talk about how he's withdrawing into like a fantasy world or something. And I didn't know if they're setting us up for he's going to be under cyber control or not, but they weren't. He's just going crazy. Yeah. And eventually he decides to just leave, and he's kind of resigned his duties. He just decides he's going to leave. He runs into a Cyberman, and he attacks the Cyberman and is promptly killed.
Yeah. And you mentioned Gemma. So she's a doctor, psychiatrist, second in command. She is super capable.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, I really liked her. I mean, there's a bit of 60s era male female interaction that's going on, but especially between two of the members of the bridge crew, which is kind of funny to watch.
Yeah, there's a British guy and a Russian woman named Tanya, and he's kind of got the hots for her.
He's hitting on her the whole time.
Well, there's kind of mutual flirting going on there.
Yeah.
It's mutual.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to watch. But Gemma is very much in command, and
she is businesslike.
Yes. And like, so when she's interviewing Jamie, giving him a medical exam, the doctor got knocked out on board the rocket ship, and so he's unconscious.
So Patrick Troughton could have a week off.
Yep. Right. And so he's unconscious on board the station. So it's Jamie who's having to talk to them. He didn't get off on a good start with them because he used the time vector generator to signal the station from the rocket ship to let them know someone was on board, because they were about to destroy it. They were afraid it would crash into them. And when he signaled them, he didn't realize, but the time vector generator was causing all kinds of problems, like hurting people with noise and stuff. So that's kind of funny. Like, it was almost like an attack. So he's trying to manage things without the doctor as this 18th century Scotsman in the 21st century.
Yeah, they do a nice job with Jamie. I mean, he's trying stuff to figure out what works to solve problems, especially in the first two episodes, because the doctor's been hit on the head. That happened when the robot on the rocket turned its engine on, and so it suddenly lurches, and the doctor gets hit on the head. And so the doctor is largely out of it for the first two episodes. And Jamie is the one who's, everything falls on Jamie. He's got to solve all the problems. They're going to blow up the rocket ship with the X-ray laser because they think it's a piece of dangerous space junk. But he knows the TARDIS is over there. So he can't, it's up to Jamie to figure out how to stop this from happening. And so he's trying stuff, including, it was him who used the TARDIS control device to signal the station, even though it bizarrely injured people through their headphones.
I've seen headphone warnings on YouTube videos, but that's ridiculous.
Yeah. But they also do play on, he's from the 1800s or the 1700s. He doesn't understand a lot of what he's working with. There's one great scene where Zoe is dictating a scientific report, and Jamie doesn't understand who she's talking to. And so he's like, "Hey, who are you talking to? Hey, who are you talking to?" And he's ruining her recording because he doesn't know what a recording is.
Right.
And by the way, as part of this is where we get Dr. John Smith.
That's
Because
right.
He sees a machine that's got John Smith and Associates, and he's going, Dr. John Smith.
Right.
It's the first time we hear that.
When
Dr.
he's
Gemma.
when he's identifying the doctor to Dr. Gemma, she's like, so who is this man? Dr. John Smith.
Well, and then like later when he's there talking to the doctor, and he's so your name's John Smith, right? Yeah, isn't that right, John? He's like, hey, doctor, wake up. Your name is John now.
Yeah.
Yes.
The doctor had previously used other pseudonyms. He was Dr. von Wehr, which is German for Doctor Who.
Right.
Like back in the Highlanders.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So Gemma, wants Jamie to get a tour of the station, and so he tells her to go to the parapsychology library to ask Zoe to give him a tour.
Cool. So Zoe's, even though she's an astrophysicist and an astrometricist, she's working in the parapsychology library. I love that they have a parapsychology library. Apparently, parapsychology has advanced in the estimation. I mean, it's currently a member of the Parapsychological Association, is actually a member of the major American Scientific Association. But it still gets a lot of shade from mainstream scientists, and so apparently parapsychology has made progress as a field in its reputation. In the next, this is like supposed to be set around 2079, so in the next 50 years or so. So I'll let the folks at the Rhine know that things are looking up. But it still hasn't achieved full recognition, because they make a point of telling us that Controller Jarvis does not, which by the way is his first name. They ought to call him Controller Bennett. Yeah, which is his last name. But it's like Commander Andy. They're always talking about Commander Jarvis, and they make a point of telling us he does not believe in ESP.
I thought you'd get a kick out of it, though. That was fun to see. So, and then when Jamie shows up, Zoe's first reaction to Jamie is to laugh at him because he's wearing girl clothes. He's a Scotsman. He's wearing a kilt. So I thought that was good. His clothing is very out of date for at least the 2080s or 2070s. So yeah, that was good. And so Zoe, at least at this point, is kind of a savant, right? She doesn't have normal emotional reaction. We would say she's on the spectrum maybe today. She doesn't have normal emotional reactions to things. She's very calm and deliberate.
It's a little different than autism, though. She comes across, people who are autistic, they can come across as a little unemotional. Right. And it's not that Zoe's unemotional. She's always pleasant. She's very pleasant. She's very friendly. She always sounds happy, and yet things don't bug her. Right. And so, and they make a thing out of this. This is going to play into her becoming a companion, because they stress that other people on the station are quite emotional. Like the guy and the girl that are flirting with each other. I mean, they're obviously emotional. Commander Jarvis, he's a shouty guy. He's obviously emotional. So we have these other, it's not that she's from an emotionless society. It's just she's unemotional. And they talk about how she was raised that way. Apparently she has some special kind of education program that she's been part of that has trained her up to this super genius level, to where that not everybody gets, that she's trained to the point that they say they use Zoe. Gemma says they use Zoe for their second opinion when they've checked with the computer. So they'll feed something into the computer, it'll give them an answer, and then they'll say, so Zoe, what do you think? And so she's very highly educated in an unusual way, and she blames her education for her lack of emotional experience And she's later in the series, she starts saying she wants to experience normal emotions. She also blames her education for only preparing her for how to deal with known emergencies, ones that are in the book. And this is not in the book. And so she's having to engage in creative, adaptive thinking that is not what she's been trained for. And she wants to, as the series progresses, she becomes more alienated from the way she was trained. And that's what's motivating her to want to sneak on the TARDIS and become a companion.
Right.
It's interesting. You've got a contrast between Jarvis, who he wants things by the book. He wants things, if there's an emergency, it's an emergency. Like you said, a known emergency that he knows how to handle. And he goes crazy because he's outside of that image. And then you've got Zoe, who's very similar, at least as far as wanting to stay, by the book and known emergencies, but she's willing to stretch herself and try to figure these things out. You see kind of that contrast between these two characters.
She's got that flexible thinking. Mm-hmm. So
while we're talking about differences in Earth society at this point, we never see one of them, but they allude to another difference in human society at this point, which is not everybody is convinced that stretching out into space is a good thing. There's apparently a bunch of people who would like to cancel the space program, which really did kind of happen after we went to the moon for a good while. But apparently there are a lot of people who think this is a bad idea. We should be focusing on Earth. And at one point, because Jamie has sabotaged the X-ray laser, they think maybe he's part of this movement. And so like he's asked, you're not one of those pull back to Earth types, are you?
Well, and in fact, they've started to suspect Jamie and the Doctor before he does the sabotage, because they're trying to figure out what's going on with this rocket. Why is it off course and, a danger to the station? And they think that maybe Jamie and the Doctor are saboteurs. And then Jamie, trying to save the TARDIS from being, because they're going to destroy this ship because it still remains a danger to the station. Although I don't know why you just go over and take control of it, but okay. But they're going to shoot it with the laser. And so Jamie decides I've got to stop them. And so he sabotages a laser with what we were talking about before, like the quick set plastic spray that he sprays on it. And that only confirms their suspicions that he's one of these saboteurs, which is unfortunate because it means then they overlook and neglect the Cybermen threat that they may have caught earlier if they weren't so focused on that.
Well, it was funny because they were trying to figure out what was going on. Jamie and the Doctor were under, house arrest, if you will. They're in the hospital room under arrest. And Jamie's going on like, oh, yes, you've had a saboteur. And then we show up and they use us as an excuse. It's like, no, that's not the logic they're going to have. Is all these problems happen because you showed up.
Right. And you actually tried to sabotage it.
And you did sabotage something, not even tried.
So meanwhile,
it's weird that Jamie never explains why. I mean, he apologizes. He says, I had to do it. I didn't want to. I didn't, but then when they say, so I had to stop the rocket ship from being destroyed, it's like, okay, why? And I can't tell you.
Right.
And it's like, Jamie, I don't think the TARDIS is that big a secret. Even if you don't want to tell them what it is, you could say the doctor has a really valuable piece of property over there. We need to get it back.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And he does eventually say, well, the doctor told me to prevent that from happening.
But that's it. Right. That's the only thing.
And that's when the doctor was unconscious. So
of
course it's like you're just gonna have to wait till he wakes up to find out why you can't do it. Which the doctor never does either. So
really the doctor didn't tell him destroy the laser. or protect the entire rocket ship. Jamie's stretching it there.
And he gets called out on it. The doctor says, great, you throw it in my lap to deal with.
Yeah. So meanwhile, this engineer is tasked with repairing the laser. And while he's in the midst of this, idiotically sees this creature crawling around on his space station and says, oh, how cute. No, it's a creature that doesn't belong in a space station that looks like a rodent. That would be very bad. You do not want this on your station.
He grows space plants, so why not space animals too?
Yes, but not loose.
I try to, in thinking of this, I mean, we're starting to have robots like this in our environment now. I mean, we've had robots for a long time. We just don't think about them that way.
Mhm.
Like if you have a fan in your house, that's a robot. You know, a robot is a device that is meant to replace human labor. And back in the day, before air conditioning and before fans, you had a person with a big, huge fan in their hands, and they would fan you. And I mean, assuming you're one of the super wealthy, but that was originally a job that people had. And so if you've got a fan, that's a robot. We just don't think of it as a robot. But now we have Roombas and little robotic pets and companions. And when the Cybermat showed up and the guy working on the laser is friendly to it, I kind of assumed he's like thinking this is a pet. This is a little robotic pet of someone else on the station or something.
Maybe. Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's possible.
Because they're cute.
Yeah. Ish. They have big eyes. So, and they end up eating up all of this material called beryllium, which is vital to the operation of the X-ray laser. Without it, they can't use it. And so the Cybermen plan is to have the Cybermats eat up their supply of beryllium so that the people will have to go from the station to the rocket ship to get more.
Yes. And notice huge hole in the Cybermen's plan. They almost blew you up right at the beginning.
Right. If it weren't for Jamie, that plan would have failed. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, commenting even though we've mentioned some of the science they're getting wrong here, I want to compliment them because X-ray lasers are a real thing.
Yes.
X-ray lasers are a laser that operates in the X-ray part of the visible spectrum, which means, among other things, you can't see the laser beam. Right. Because it's above the frequency of human vision. But they are very powerful. So that's something that you would, because of the high frequencies of the X-rays, they're very powerful. I've read about like ways of powering them using hydrogen bombs and stuff like that. Although that's not conventionally done, but they do kick out tons of power. And so it would be reasonable for a space wheel to have an X-ray laser.
Right.
One thing, talking about the Cybermen's plan, the original plan the Doctor figures out is that's the purpose of the Cybermats was to destroy that, the
beryllium
capacitor, that giant capacitor.
Yep.
And Jamie beat him to it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, they would have done that too, including eating up the fuel. They would have just incapacitated the X-ray. Yes. So it's around this point. So if they go to get the beryllium, then the Cybermen plan to use their mind control to capture some of the astronauts who come over and use them to take them back to the station, and that's what ends up happening. The Doctor figures out Cybermen are involved so the engineer, as he's being attacked, sprays the quickset plastic all over one of the Cybermats, and then the Doctor X-rays it to see what's inside, and that's when he sees the Cybermat. So now he knows the Cybermen are involved.
Yeah, and Jamie recognizes it too because he saw the Cybermats on the moon base in the previous story, which is where they were introduced.
Right.
One thing, by the way, if you, at least according to the TARDIS wiki, this is set like 9 years after the moon base. And so, and it's also set after the moon base in Doctor Who chronology. And I think it's reasonable to infer that is the order of the stories.
Yeah.
But despite that, the people on the station don't know beans about Cybermen.
Right. They're still new.
Yeah. So there's like already been 2 Cyberman invasions of our solar system with the 10th planet and the moon base. And these guys still haven't, I guess, gotten the memo.
Right. Maybe it's still top secret. So one of the interesting things is we're told that the people on board this space station have training and also technology to prevent brainwashing, to prevent external control of your thought processes. So that's apparently something that they've had to deal with, or it's common enough that you would train everybody to be, not susceptible to that. So I thought that was interesting. And there's apparently a circuit that activates when someone is under mind control, and that they can then see it on a scanner or that sort of thing.
The doctor also says that it's not, I'll call it hypnosis, even though that's not quite what it is, that the Cybermen are doing on the station workers it's actually easy to block. The doctor just says, put a metal plate with a transistor on the back of the neck and it'll block their control. And he even describes that as crude, but he indicates you can use crude methods to block their control, which is kind of cool. It's easier to throw a monkey wrench into something than is often suspected.
So one of the things we see is this spacewalking. They do a lot of spacewalking back and forth between the ship and the station, and it's always fun. I mean, with Jamie and Zoe, and then the other two wheel astronauts, it's not too bad. When we see the Cybermen doing the spacewalking, it is hilarious because they're doing this arm wavy thing. You watch me on the video. Their arms are going up and down, and they're kind of bouncing as they're spacewalking. I mean, it's the technology of the time that they could make this, but I laughed out loud when I saw them doing it because it was really fun. So, and Doctor does make Jamie spacewalk over to the rocket. Poor Jamie, in this 18th century Scotsman having to spacewalk to retrieve the time vector generator, this control rod from the TARDIS. Along with Zoe. So it's sort of an important part of his plan.
Yeah, he had put it in the doctor's pocket, and then it fell out of the doctor's pocket when they were moving him because he was unconscious. And so he's got to go back over to the rocket to get the control rod. And the doctor, and this is happening when the meteorites are getting close to the station and they're going to be blasting them with the laser. And people are going on, they're juicing the drama of how dangerous it is for Jamie and Zoe to spacewalk over there. And they're yelling at the doctor about it. And he talks about how Zoe has calculated the risk. So I was like, well, of course Zoe has. And deemed it acceptable. But then he gets to use, I keep a little list in my notes function of hack dialogue that I run into that you used to hear all the time in these shows. Like, you must believe me, you must, as if that's going to convince anyone,
Yes.
Nobody, I mean, who talks like that? It's
right.
Like, I'm telling you the truth and I'll give you some reasons why, if you'll listen to me, you must believe me, you must. Well, the doctor also gets to use the classic line, it was a calculated risk. It's like, whoever talks like that, whoever says something was a calculated risk.
And meanwhile, so Gemma is the one who took them to the airlock. They don't call it airlock, I think they call it loading bay. But she's the one who took them down, put them in their suits, sent them out. And while she's there, the Cybermen attack, and Gemma turns out to be the real hero of this because she bravely gets the message to the doctor in the operations room, even as the Cybermen's bearing down on her, and then kills her right there. I mean, it was pretty shocking, actually.
It is, especially the fact she's a woman and they just shoot her dead.
Yeah.
And she's laying there on the floor dead, and the camera lingers on her and so forth. And it is very effective, her death. What she was doing was warning the control center. The Cybermen decided, now that we've got control of the station, we're going to kill everybody. And so they were going to put some they had one of their human hypno slaves who was going to put some cylinders into the air supply that would turn it into pure ozone, which is, so ozone is O3 instead of O2. It's triox. It's got 3 oxygen atoms. And guess what? We don't breathe that really well.
Yeah.
So it'll mess with your lungs and you'll die. And that part is true. And so she's warning the control center of the Cybermen's plan to poison the air supply, and you need to shift over to the alternative air system so it won't work. I also love how the air system is powered by lava lights. It's cool. They have the coolest air system with those lava lights.
So around the same time that the cyberplaner finally realizes someone on the inside knows who they are, and then they identify the doctor eventually as the enemy. That's when the doctor turns the tables on them. They think they're luring him out of behind this force field, the shield around the operations center, so they can get in. But he knows that the Irishman Flanagan is compromised, and so he goes out and has them prepared to ambush Flanagan when he comes in, and he's going to use the time vector generator from the TARDIS to power up the laser, because that's been the big problem. The laser doesn't have any power. And I was thinking about this, like this time vector generator gets used for a lot of different things in this episode. And while the Doctor does have a sonic screwdriver at this point, it's pretty rudimentary. It's literally used as a screwdriver most of the time. But the TVG, as I'll call it, would have been the sonic in later years. Like if later Doctors, this would have been a sonic the whole time that, use it. And I wonder if this device kind of became the root idea for what the sonic would later become.
It's an interesting idea. It does function a lot like the sonic screwdriver later will.
Yeah. And it, superpowers the laser so that they can at the last second destroy the asteroids as they're coming in. There's this tense scene.
Oh, I know. They have this game of asteroids with the meteorites.
As Jamie and Zoe are spacewalking back, they're getting these asteroids blasted before they can hit them. Like I know, like in modern times, we'd have the great graphics and we see this and we'd see a meteorite coming at them and they get blasted in time and it would be this wonderful CGI thing. But the drama is the same, which is they're being rescued from getting smashed by these rocks.
Yeah. And one of the things that's interesting, and I only noticed this because I'm aware of the fact that X-ray lasers are invisible. And so I wanted to see, are they going to show us a visible laser beam? In which case I'll get to laugh at it on the next sequence of Doctor Who. And so I was watching for, are they going to show us this thing? And they, throughout the entire meteorite destruction sequence, they don't.
Yeah.
They show us Jamie and Zoe. They show us the control guys controlling the beam. They show us images of the incoming meteorites, both in directly and on radar. And they never show us the laser beam shooting them. They're cutting around that, and it does not affect the drama of this. I thought it was a very effective sequence, despite the fact they never show us the beam shooting them.
Which now saves money.
It saves money, and it worked. Later, when they shoot the Cyberman ship, they do show us the laser beam. It's visible, so haha.
Right. So after they've destroyed the Cybermen and foiled their plan, the Doctor and Jamie are taking their leave. And as you mentioned, Zoe is curious and she wants to go beyond. Like she's had sort of an existential crisis a little bit and wants to know.
Literally, this was an existential crisis.
Yeah. I mean, and she wants to find out more about who she is and see more of the universe. And decides to stow away with the Doctor, which is an interesting difference. We've had a few stowaways throughout the Doctor's time.
Adric.
Yep. And
that didn't work out as well.
And so I know. And so but she might, I think she's the first. Well, no, because Steve in the first Doctor's time.
Yep.
Steve he ends
the stowaway.
He's the stowaway as well. And the Doctor is like, okay, come with, which is an interesting reaction on his part. Maybe because I think he did, get an affinity for her. And she's going to, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of Zoe and Jamie, but I feel like it'll create a good balance between Jamie, the man from the past, and Zoe, the woman from the future, whereas Victoria and Jamie were both from the past.
Right. And the balance with Jamie and Zoe is the best. It's the best companion pairing of the second Doctor's time.
Yeah. But he won't let her go until he lets her show her through a thought transmitter what she might be in for. And then we get this montage of various scenes from past stories of what the Doctor's done. Yeah, the Daleks mainly, which is interesting. So yeah, and so now we have new companion Zoe. So that's where we end. Any final thoughts, Father Cory?
I love Flanagan where before he gets whammied by the Cybermen he's fighting the other two guys and goes, I'm going to teach you the noble and manly art of fighting. He just says the noble and manly art. And of course, fighting, boxing.
Boxing. Yeah. That's what he's referring to. Pugilism.
He holds his own.
and it's interesting. I was talking with a friend once about this, because there are concerns morally about boxing. If you're smacking someone upside the head a lot, it can cause issues. And that's been something that's been known about for a long time. And I was talking to a friend about Catholic moralists and what they've said about this historically, because boxing's been around for a long time, and Catholic moralists talked about things like dueling, and how you couldn't morally duel with someone. In fact, it was forbidden to have a priest on hand to hear final confessions in a duel, because that's how down they were on dueling. They didn't want to facilitate it by letting a priest be there. So you also had men hitting each other in the head forever, and so Catholic moralists had looked at boxing, and the prevailing opinion among older Catholic moralists, I gather, seems to be negative, except for those from Ireland.
So true.
So how would that extend to MMA then?
No kidding, a whole nother level.
At least what mixed martial arts has done, though, is show us which martial arts actually work, and which are just garbage.
Yeah.
Let them fight. Put the different martial arts against each other and see who regularly wins.
This is true. Anything else, Father Cory?
Nope.
Jimmy, any final thoughts?
There's a great line in here where Zoe's talking about the rocket ship and how it must have gotten here and it had to be refueled and stuff like that. And she's absolutely convinced of her point of view. And she tells the doctor that it's undeniable. It's just logic. And he says, logic, my dear Zoe, merely enables one to be wrong with authority.
Yep.
And I love them making that point, because in 60s television, including over on Star Trek airing at the same time, logic is presented as the thing. Logic is the bomb. It's gonna tell us all the answers.
It's infallible.
Yeah, and I love and I'm trained in logic. I mean, I've taken classes in symbolic logic and so forth, and it's like, guys, garbage in, garbage out. Your logic can be perfect. You've got to have the right facts to start with. And
that's number one when you're doing symbolisms of logic is if your premises are wrong, your logic can be sound, your answer is still going to be wrong.
Yeah.
So I loved seeing the doctor point this out.
Yeah, there was a doctor on Star Trek as well pointing out the flaws in logic.
Although I will say, in this case, Zoe was actually right.
She was. Awesome. So let's move on to some listener feedback. We get some feedback on our recent episode 307 on the ribose. Did I say it right? Ribos
or rebos.
See, we talked about this before. I was going to get it right, and I didn't. The ribos operation.
As Americans, our native pronunciation scheme would be to say ribos, but it's not. No one in the show says that. It's either ribos or rebos. So
anyway, we have some feedback on that. And the first feedback comes from Paul Leone via YouTube, who writes, this is one of my favorite classic Doctor arcs. Romana 1 is one of my favorite companions. And similarly, Jason there on YouTube also says, so glad you're finally getting into the Romanas. They're such fun characters.
Oh, yes, they are a lot of fun.
Yeah, we talked about Romana 2 in the Fourth Doctor story. We
talked about Shada,
that's right. So that's my only exposure to the Romanas so far, and that was good. So I'm looking forward to that. Excellent. So as we wrap things up, we want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Doctor Who, including Ted K, Bruce G, Megan S, Jerry G, and Kevin K. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Doctor Who in all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. And so that's it from us. What did you think of this second Doctor story, The Wheel in Space? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page. Send an email to drwho@sqpn.com. Visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. And you can watch the Secrets of Doctor Who in full video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. We'll be back next time. We'll be discussing the Big Finish 10th Doctor and 12th Doctor story, Regeneration Impossible. Now, that next time will be at the beginning of February. We're taking a brief hiatus for a holiday, but when we come back, that's what we'll be talking about. And until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thanks, Don.
Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Thank you, Don.
And once again, I'm Don Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, logic merely enables one to be wrong with authority.